Well, thank you so much, Dr. Karen Stout, for joining us today for our speaker series on leadership development, especially in times of crisis. So Dr. Stout is the director of the Institute for Leadership and a close partner of ours in Entrepreneurship and Innovation. She's the Bauman Distinguished Professor of Leadership. She's a full professor in communication studies with an emphasis in organizational and instructional communication. She's also a fantastic speaker and consultant on issues of leadership, organizational, and personal development. And she's also leading the charge on the launch of some leadership programs for professional and continuing education that we're really looking forward to in the fall. So thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Stout.
Thank you, Meg. I really appreciate it. All right, I'll just get started. It's really great to speak with you all today about leadership development, especially in times of crisis. My point in talking with you all today is to encourage you not to wait to develop yourself as a leader, not to wait until there's time. Even during a crisis, we can strengthen our leadership skills, our values, and our behaviors. I have learned over the last 15 years, and I might give you some examples from my own personal life in the next 27 minutes about some of the crises that I've developed or that I've gone through in my life. And what I know is from those experiences, it's really helped peel away what's most important in my life and really helped me engage with some deep personal development where I feel like a remarkably different person 15 years later, and yet still at the very core, my very self. And so I'm hoping to share some of these lessons with you and teach you some strategies to analyze, practice, and reflect on leadership at any time. So one of the first lessons I always tell my students or any group that I'm speaking to is that to grow the leader, you must first grow the person. Every leadership scholar, every leadership instructor provides this quote, because in order to be a better leader, we have to be a better person. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that and give you some strategies. But first I want to mention exactly how do we develop as leaders? Let's answer that question first. So how do we develop as leaders? Dr. Barbara Kellerman, who is a professor of public leadership at Harvard University, says that it's really 3 steps. The first step is that we have to get some kind of basic leadership education, that we, ideally have some kind of focused program for at least 6 weeks, but maybe a year. It could be some kind of professional mentoring program. It could be enrollment in classes, but that we need some time focused on learning about leadership concepts to give us some language and to understand how leadership behaviors look, understand our own leadership values, that sort of thing. Then we need to engage in some reflective practice. We need to put into practice all of the things that we've learned. And then that needs to be followed by really what's a lifelong commitment to learning about leadership. We don't become a leader at the end of that 6-week class. We don't become a leader because we did an internship or we took on a professional development role. This is really a lifelong commitment to becoming better people and better leaders. I'm going to be doing another Lunch Bite session a little bit later in August, and we're going to again be talking about Dr. Barbara Kellerman's work, talking about leadership systems. She's really one of the best scholars out there. So I'm not going to be able to give you today, 6 weeks worth of lessons, but my goal is to give you some language so that you can open up your awareness about what leadership looks like so you can begin this education for yourself. So we're going to start by talking about analyzing some leadership stereotypes and some common mistakes. And these are things that I start off literally my first days of classes and my first sessions with folks talking about, because we need to break through a major bunch of stereotypes before we even get started. Because one of the things that we do as followers and leaders is we hold a variety of unconscious biases and stereotypes about leaders and leadership. So the first thing we need to forget is that notion that leaders are born. Leaders are not born. Leaders are made. They're made through education. They're made through practice. They're made through reflection. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We also need to stop confusing the idea of positional authority with leadership. Somebody may be your boss, but that doesn't mean that they're your leader. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. You know, a lot of so-called leaders have signed treaties or have taken away individuals' civil rights and really not engaged in leadership that serves the community or that serves everyone's purposes, but instead serves their own. So let's stop confusing. And sometimes in business, we talk about confusing management with leadership. And that's what we're talking about here. Don't confuse somebody's title as them actually demonstrating good leadership behavior. One of the other common misperceptions is that we think about leadership as a checklist. I got this, I was president of this association, I got this promotion, I have these endorsements on LinkedIn, check, 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 I'm a leader. It doesn't work that way. Instead, I want you to think of leadership as a means of being rather than doing. And one of those kind of misconceptions along with thinking of leadership as a checklist is that we think of doing as more important than reflecting. We need to spend time as a leader thinking back on, was I successful in the thing that I just did? We also make a mistake of waiting until there's the right time. Well, I don't really have time to sign up for Leadership Whatcom this year, maybe next year, maybe next year. I don't have the time to sign up or to engage in this work or read this book. There is never a right time. John Lennon is famous for having said, life is what happens when you're busy making other plans. And when we're talking about and thinking about how quickly life unfolds when there's a crisis, like what we're going through with the pandemic right now, and an economic crisis, and many of us are suffering personal crises right now, there is never a right time to engage in self-reflection and self-development work. You will always put yourself on the back burner. One of the other things, and I don't know that we necessarily put language around this, but I think in many ways we think of studying leadership as an indulgence, because studying leadership is about studying and improving ourselves. And shouldn't I be putting other people's needs first? Shouldn't I be taking care of my family? Shouldn't I be taking care of my employees? And so we don't do that time for that personal self-reflection and personal development. It's an indulgence for me to sit and read this book that's just for me right now. It's an indulgence for me to do this professional development training. And the thing about that is that when you're investing time to make yourself better, to make yourself as a leader better, you're making your community better because you're leading them better. So it's not an indulgence for you, it's an investment in your community. One of the other things that I really want to warn you about is that we have this tendency to think that because somebody published a book and that they're wealthy and that they're successful, that they're a good leader too. The leadership publication industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry with a lot of pop culture books. And I really want to warn you about being careful about your educational sources. Just because somebody is wealthy doesn't mean they're a good leader. They may have had a major leg up on getting started in their career. They have maybe demonstrated values related to their leadership that aren't your values. Their context is not your context. So be careful about what you read, and maybe read it for the interesting story, but don't feel bad because you're not experiencing or being as successful in some of the ways that somebody else does. Perhaps the best leader that you know in your life is actually the person who lives down your street, who is just a regular middle income person. So don't equate wealth with leadership success. And I also want you to not assume that leadership is only a few characteristics. Sometimes, we think that the leader is the bossy person that's standing in front of the room, when actually the leader is the quiet person next to you who's checking in with everybody, making sure that they're feeling emotionally okay. They're making sure that everybody's voices are being heard. Or they're perhaps the person with the great administrative and strategic skills to figure out how do we get this project done. But we often think it's the bossy person in the front of the room. I really want you not to confuse charisma with competence. Those two things are very, very different. And just because somebody's a charismatic leader doesn't mean that they're a competent leader. So I'm going to show you the slide with lots of leadership words on it. We are not going to have time to talk about these today, but my point in showing them to you is to broaden your awareness about exactly what leadership is. I could do a lunch bite on every single one of these bulleted points. Each one of these is like a chapter in my 101 class. I can do a 2-hour workshop session on any one of these things. My point in showing them to you is to help you understand the breadth and variety of things that we're talking about when we're trying to develop ourselves as leaders. And I want to highlight 2 things. One is that leadership is culturally bound and culturally perceived. You grew up with a certain set of life experiences that are going to put certain leadership values at the forefront for you. And it's going to mean that you demonstrate certain leadership skills and certain leadership behaviors that somebody else is not going to demonstrate. That doesn't mean you're right and they're wrong, or vice versa. I want you to understand that there is a diversity of leadership that's successful and important and valuable and meaningful out there. And rather than thinking that there's one right way to lead. Because what that means is we often see, oh, this leader is like this, I'm not like that, and therefore we don't put that label of leader on ourselves, and it holds us back. It holds us back from thinking that we have important things to contribute. And so I just really want to break through that notion for you. The other thing I want to highlight in this slide is that bullet off to the right-hand side that says leadership is a persuasive process. I'm going to talk about this more in August at my next lunch bite. But when we're talking about leadership as a persuasive process, we're really indicating that leadership is a relationship between follower and leader. I'm not a leader unless you say I am. You have to be willing to follow me. I have to be worthy of your leadership. I have to persuade you that this project that we're working on, or this goal that we're working on, is worthy of your time. And if I am mistreating you, if I am not listening to you, I'm not persuading you to follow me. And that's something that a lot of people are really shocked to think about, that you have choices as followers about who you want to follow. And as a leader, I have a responsibility not to just persuade you to follow me, but to be ethical in doing so. So again, we could talk about all of these for its own lunch bite. But I want to talk to you about what it means to practice leadership during a crisis. Oops, sorry, there we go. When we're practicing leadership during a crisis, a couple of things happen. We often feel very overwhelmed. And over the last few months since the beginning of the pandemic, you may be feeling like this tendency to fight or flight. We have that language. We've heard that a lot over the last several decades. But one thing that you might not know is that fight or flight research was actually collected on a primarily white male college-aged sample population. That when this study was replicated again with a more diverse sample, they found that there were actually additional stress responses, like tending and befriending. So if you're somebody who procrastinates, you need to make some brownies instead of facing the work project or that you need to do, or if you find yourself like incessantly vacuuming your house because you don't want to face some crisis or some terrible stressful thing that you're going through right now, that's what's happening right now. You are tending to yourself or to others. I used to have a student tell me that she couldn't start a paper without like first baking like everything in her house. I developed the self-coping mechanism of giving myself a manicure before I sat down to write a paper in grad school. Because as I would start writing the paper, I would see how bad my cuticles were and how chipped my nails were. And then I would give myself a manicure to stop from writing the paper. So I just started giving myself a manicure first, and then would write the paper, and I would have no excuse to stop. Tending is not a problem. Sometimes you maybe need to create some art. Do it, but bookend it. Don't get lost in the tending too much, because what that does then is it creates more stress for you because you haven't been dealing with a crisis. You've been procrastinating. And so you need to bookend that and say, I'm going to bake one set of cupcakes and then I'm going to get to this thing. Relatedly, we befriend when we're stressed out. This might mean we go out for drinks with girlfriends or guy friends. We might need to call our mom. We need to be with our family and have a game night. We need to be in relationship with people when we're stressed out. we need to recognize that as a very important part of how we are as leaders during crisis. If you are responsible for leading other people and you're stressed out, maybe the best thing you could do is just to spend some time with them and connect with them as people, not worry about the crisis, not worry about the issue, but just be in community with each other. One of the other things that happens when we are in crisis as leaders is that we tend to think in binaries to try and simplify this big, giant, terrible, complex thing that we're going through. We think of things as good or bad or right or wrong, when really there's much more complexity going on. I could do a whole semester's worth of classes about conflict management for leaders. But really, I want you to take away that understanding that when things are big and giant, we need to take that big giant thing and break it into smaller pieces and just address the smaller pieces at the time so we're not feeling so overwhelmed. Sorry, I'm not used to this mouse that I have. The other thing that I want to say is when we're practicing leadership during a crisis is that we often fail to live in the moment. You'll see there's a picture here of the Roman god Janus. The Roman god Janus was two-faced. He was the god of duality, time, transition. He was the god of the beginning. And Janus had two faces, one that always looked back at the past and one that always looked at the future. When we are leaders in crisis, what we often do is we regret about that thing I just did or said, or the thing that I just messed up, or we fret and worry about what's coming up in front of us. And what that means is we don't spend time in the moment just being, reflecting, and processing where we're at. I think it was the Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh who said that all joy truly comes from living in the moment. We can never find joy by imagining the future. And when we're thinking about the past, it's not really joy that we're experiencing. All true joy comes in the moment. And the challenge is when we're in crisis, we can think, I don't have a moment. I don't have a moment of free time to be. I don't have a moment to sit and think and reflect. And I can say that actually we can find those moments. I have been through a lot of personal crisis over the last 15 years, from the death of my daughter 15 years ago to within 3 years having 2 children and 2 miscarriages, to my mom getting sick with multiple forms of cancer, my dad getting dementia, my mom telling me she expected to take in my intellectually and physically disabled older sister to care for as my own once she died, and getting legal guardianship of my sister, doing my parents' wills. I mean, we have been through 10 years of caregiving for 2 parents and my sister, all while I was working more than a full-time job at Western, all while I was trying to be the mother of a 2- and 4-year-old, and raise my children. There were many times that I thought, time for meditation? No way. And yet I could find time. And it doesn't have to be big amounts of time, but it does mean reframing how you're thinking about how you exist in the world. So standing in the line at the grocery store or at the bank became a joyous experience for me, because for 2 minutes, I could not worry about my parents' finances. I couldn't worry about getting anyone anywhere or doctor's appointments. All I could do is just stand here and wait. Somebody else had control of my life. And so for a little while, I gave up that control. Find times in your day, whether it's walking from one building to another for a meeting. You do not have to be spending those 5 minutes walking, fretting about what's going to happen. Instead, enjoy the sound of the birds, enjoy the sun on your face, and find that time for yourself, because there are those moments, even in the time of crisis. When we're in crisis, it brings us a choice. And I think I heard Dr. Art Sherwood say this in one of his lunch bites a couple of weeks ago. What shows up when you show up? Because that is always the choice that we have in front of us as leaders. What shows up when you show up? So I want to give you some tips and tricks to think about as you're on your leadership journey. One of the most important things that we do as leaders is reflect. And in fact, this is the only social science that I know of that actually requires reflection as part of our methodology in leadership studies. To become a better leader, you can't get there without reflection. Remember, leadership is not a checklist. Leadership, really developing as a leader, means thinking about what I've done, how I could do it better, and what I want to do next time. And that means we have to spend time reflecting. And one of the ways that we do that is through observation. So how did I handle that situation? How did other people handle that situation? What contradictions did I notice? Meaning, did I think everything was going fine, but did I see a couple of people giving each other side eye over there, which means that they might be not agreeing, or that they might be, was somebody like sighing and stressed out? Were there contradictions that I could notice in other people's nonverbals that maybe helped me understand that things didn't go the way I think they went? More than that, oh, I guess not more than that, but in addition to that, look for the values, leadership skills, leadership behaviors you see in yourself and in others. I am a very task-oriented leader. So that means when I'm leading a group, I might come in and just be all, let's get together on our to-do list today, who's responsible for what. And then 15 minutes into the meeting, I can see everybody's stressed out and they're not connecting and they're not paying attention. And I need to stop myself and say, all right, let's talk about how everybody's doing today, what's going on, because I have not relationally connected in with everyone. So I can see by their behaviors that they're not engaged. And I know about myself that I maybe need to stop for a minute and check in with everyone. It's also important for me to notice that what that leadership looks like in the people that I'm working with. Just because I might be the official person leading the group, it doesn't mean I'm the only leader. In fact, everybody in our group likely has leadership skills that they're bringing to the table. The best thing I can do as a leader is to recognize and value those skills in them and help nurture them, because our responsibility as leaders is to create the next generation of leaders and to help people see themselves as leaders, not just that they're followers of somebody else's work. So reflecting on our leadership also requires some intentionality. One thing I want to just kind of say up front is that your intentionality is not necessarily your impact. You can intend to go into a meeting with the best, calmly and work together collectively for a solution. But then if you're getting stressed out, then it might cause the group to get stressed out. And the impact might be that you created chaos. So do some pre-planning. Set goals for yourself, for your emotions and behaviors and outcomes. And set goals for yourself about how you want to treat others. I once had a very intense conflict with somebody. And before I went in to meet with them, I just really set the intention to be very calm and collected, to never raise my voice, to allow them to listen, but to also not allow myself to be stepped on and walked over. And I wouldn't allow myself to be manipulated. And when I saw that that was the only goal of this person in the conflict, I just calmly said, let's try and have this conversation again another time. I see that we're not getting anywhere. That pre-planning really helped me feel like I knew how I could get this through this situation. And then we have to do some post-reflection. Once the event is over, did my behavior match my desired goals? Did I really do what I set out to do? And that's a really important thing to understand in that step, that process of reflection. There are a variety of methods that you can engage in for reflection as well. Journaling and writing is really key for a lot of people. I honestly am not a good journaler in terms of like writing every day. I don't pull out my journal and write every morning like some people are so good and structured about that. But I know when I'm in crisis, this is the thing that makes me feel the best. So make that space for yourself. And it doesn't have to be like a beautiful journal. One of my best friends has a journal from every month growing up since she was 14. I write on whatever is in front of me. If it's my computer or a book or whatever, it doesn't matter, just get it out. Another really important method for reflection is to meditate. Even if it's for 2 minutes, even if it's you're waiting 10 minutes for your doctor to show up for a doctor's appointment, that can be time that you spend meditating. it's because it's a practice, and because it's a word that we think of as, you know, sitting cross-legged with our eyes closed in a beautiful scenic environment, that we need to set aside 20 to 40 minutes or 2 hours for it. That would be great. But when we're in crisis, sometimes all we have is 2 minutes. So take advantage of the time that you have. Also, practicing mindfulness is really crucial. That Roman god Janus, always looking forward and looking back, meant there was never the opportunity to be mindful in the moment. When we slow our brain down and just, again, the Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh talked about a meditative practice, what he calls walking meditation, of washing the dishes and just feeling the soap on your hands, the dirty plate turning clean, feeling the water rinsing off the plate. That is a form of walking meditation or waking meditation, where you're still engaging in the world, but you're focusing in on what you're doing. That practice is really important, especially in times of crisis, because it gives our conscious brain a chance to settle down, so our subconscious brain can continue to work on the problems that we're facing in our life. If we're constantly worried about what's happening next or what just happened, we're not actually giving our brain the space to problem solve. And so even if it means you're in the shower and you're just paying attention to the radio and the soap and the water and feeling your hair getting rinsed out, that kind of mindfulness is a little brain break for yourself. And it's an emotional and spiritual break as well. Another important method for reflection is to meet with mentors or accountability buddies. You should have a mentor. You should have a lot of mentors, not just one. They should be older than you, and you should even think of people who are younger than you as mentors too, because they may bring new insight to your life that you would never imagine. Have some friends who maybe serve as accountability buddies. Brene Brown talks about this just really beautifully in her TED Talk, or one of her talks, Why Your Critics Don't Count. You need to have somebody who's going to love you and build you up, and also be honest with you and tell you when you messed up. We don't grow by succeeding all the time. We grow from failure and reflection. And somebody who loves you and who can tell you that you messed up and but you can do better next time is a really important person to have at your side whenever you can. So I'm speaking really quickly at you to get a lot crammed in 30 minutes, but I want to leave you with one thought as we end up today. And that is, the world breaks everyone, and afterward, some are strong at the broken places. So I also want to give you a few resources, some leadership sources. There in Whatcom County, there's Leadership Whatcom, which is a great professional development organization. The International Leadership Association provides a lot of great seminars, workshops, trainings, webinars. The conference, they have a couple of conferences every year, and they're really amazing. And I have a link here to Dr. Barbara Kellerman and a handful of books that are really wonderful resources. And Meg had mentioned that we've got some classes coming up this next year too. So thanks for listening to me today, and I welcome any questions if we have time for them.